Holiday orders are coming in, and this one's for the biggest cutting board I've ever made. I've made a lot of boards from simple stripes to complex patterns, but they've all been in the small to mid-size range. So when this order came in for a 12 by 18 and an 18 by 24, I knew it would be a challenge, but I figured it's just a bigger version of what I've made before, so it's just a simple pattern. How hard could it be, right? What I didn't really think about was the fact that all of my equipment is just the right size for what I normally do, and this one was about to push my limits every step of the way. In the beginning, it was business as usual. I planed some maple, cut it to length, jointed an edge, and started ripping everything down to size. I'm making a simple brick pattern here, so I needed 2 panels for each board. One with the full 3-inch wide blocks all the way, and another with half-width blocks on each end to give me the centered offset. When it came time to glue the panels, I came to my first problem. I don't usually need cauls, but after flipping every other board to alternate the grain, I realized just how uneven the board was going to be and how unprepared I was to fix it in that moment. Alright, so I kind of screwed up on this one. I usually use my little panel clamps for this stuff, but obviously this board is going to be way too big for those. Before I go on to the next panel, I'm going to go cut a couple pieces of steel and make some cauls so I can use that on the next piece instead of every clamp I own. Hopefully this will be alright. Luckily, I already had a bunch of 1-inch square tubing in my steel collection, so I cut that down to size and made some cauls for the 2 larger boards. The smaller ones were still too big for my panel clamps, but luckily they were narrow enough that I could get them straight without any help from the cauls. All right, come back and scrape the glue off here in a little bit, and we'll call it a weekend. Get back to these on Monday. So these have been sitting over the weekend. Obviously the glue's all dried up on those. I did remember after this whole clamping debacle on Friday that I have 2 sets of these hardware for making larger panel clamps. They've been sitting on the shelf for almost 2 years, actually a little over 2 years, and I guess it's time I need to put these together. So I went and picked up about the straightest 2x4 I could find, and before I go any further on these, I'm going to go ahead and make these clamps so we can use them on the next glue up. So let's get started on that. I think one of the reasons I never built these was that after I brought them home, I realized what a pain they were going to be to build, and since they were still in the bag with the receipt, I'm guessing I intended to return them for something else and just never did. Since it's too late to do that, now I might as well take the time to build them and make some use out of them. After drilling all the holes, I ripped it down the middle to make the top and bottom bar for each clamp. I added a longer piece of plywood to each clamping face, and then I wrapped everything in packing tape to keep the glue from sticking to it. Back on the board, we'll get these tested out on the next glue up. Now for the next workaround. The panels were actually too big to fit in my big crosscut sled, so I had to cut them in half with the track saw before I could run them through the sander. Once they were smooth and even, then I could cut them into end grain strips on the table saw. The smaller boards do fit in the sled, but after I squared them up, I realized that it was still going to be easier to just use the fence on the saw to get those cut into strips. After all the issues the first time, I decided I better give these new clamps a dry run before I add any glue. It's a good thing I did because they were a little bit finicky to start with and I needed to mess with them a bit to get everything working correctly. Luckily, after that, they worked just fine. To make it a little easier to line up the centers of the offsetting blocks for the brick pattern, I drew a line with a T-square before I added any glue. That was definitely better than some of my other last-minute alignment tricks that I've come up with in the past. Once everything was lined up and clamped tight, I added a few cabinet clamps just to make sure there was enough pressure all along the panel. All right, that's that one. For the final glue up on the small one, I was able to pull out my panel clamps and use them, so that one went off without a hitch. The 12 by 18 board was already nice and flat, so I was able to just run it through the drum sander and smooth it out, but unfortunately the 18 by 24 was not going to be so easy. I started to work on it with one of my least favorite tools to use, but then I realized I could actually fit that on my CNC and work smarter, not harder. It pushed the absolute maximum size that I could cut on that little machine, but it did get it flattened out for me. Meanwhile, I could get to work on the smaller one, finish sanding and routing the edges down before water popping it to raise the grain. After a few flattening passes on both sides, I could do the same thing for the big board and get it ready for the laser engraving. I've been thinking for a while now how I could engrave on the edges of my boards just to keep the cutting surface clean, and since my customer asked specifically for that, it seemed like it might be the right time to finally figure that out. So I built this vertical clamping surface that slides into some tracks on the underside of the table and then just pulled the laser out far enough to do what I needed to do. Since the underside would be open, I put on these super sexy green glasses to protect my eyes from the light. Clamping platform worked out great, and it held everything right where I needed it to get the engraving done on the edges. Though, of course, the bigger board had to fight just a little bit. It was actually about 1/8 of an inch too big to fit into the laser, but it went in just far enough that I could get it done. After a final sanding, it was into the oil bath for the small one, but of course, there was one last adjustment for the big guy. Since it's bigger than the tub, I had to give it a hand bath. It's not really a big deal since I don't let them soak in there for long anyway. I mostly just do it because it's quicker and less messy than wiping each one down individually. After they soaked up what they could, I wiped off the excess oil, added a coat of board butter, and buffed everything out for a perfect finish. All right, these two are ready to get packed up and sent off to their new home, and Christmas season is just getting started, so I've got a lot more to make. If you can't get enough cutting board videos, click on the link up here. I've got a whole collection of them you can watch. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.